things that really stuck with me, and I think really defines a lot of what you've done in social justice, was you looked to the core of what was happening in Pontchartrain Park. And I remember you describing for me that the love of these people in this community, where they were at risk of sort of being bought out by developers and fighting for something and trying to figure out what their next steps were. And you said, let's bring solutions to the table. It's as simple as that. And
right.
Of course, in New Orleans, that's like the understatement of the year. So we're going to talk
that
about...
That was a while ago. I think I would say something different now.
Well, I've seen a lot of... I mean, I think that message kind of is consistent in a lot of what you do on the social justice front and also in your acting as well. But let's back up and start with 1981. You listed a lot of places that you lived in Brooklyn.
Between
81 and 85.
As a broke student at Juilliard, whenever there was an available cheap apartment, I tried to take advantage of it. And I was a roommate of all the jazz musicians, so I was kind of, whenever somebody went on tour, I said, I'll take their room, you know? So I literally lived with Wynton and Branford Marcellus on Washington Avenue. I lived with Jeff Tane Watts on Adelphi Street. Came back one time and somebody else was in my apartment, about 10 other guys from Berklee School of Music. I lived with Peter Washington, the great bass player, on Willoughby. So I moved around a lot, but Fort Greene was a black arts mecca at that time. And it was Slide Hampton, and it was Betty Carter, and yes, it was, and Spike, Ventures started there, and there was Carrie Mae Weems and Lorna Simpson, and actors like Ntade Mwine, and so everyone's there, and it was a real incubator for talent, and it was my real coming of age here in Brooklyn.
Tell me how that helped you develop, being surrounded by so much talent that was there and supporting.
Well, the thing that is so important to remember about the arts is what thoughts are to the individual. Arts are to the community as a whole. You know, when you lie awake in your bed at night and you think about who you are, what are your values, where have you failed, where have you succeeded, where do you hope to go, where have you been, what those thoughts are to you as an individual, that's what the forum of art is for society as a whole. Who are we? What are our values? Where are we going to go? What do we hope to do? Where have we failed? It's where we collectively say this is important to us. And it's tangible. Entertainment is just a residual of art. The actual manifestation of what art is a society, a group of people saying, this is who we are, this is our value system. Like Albert Murray said in all of his books, it's the intersection between people and life itself. That intersection, that line is culture and what it is. And I understood how important that is because you live it in New Orleans. We sing when we talk, what's up, bruh? Hey, La Fale, Wade, what's going on, bruh? You know, you see the American aesthetic in our cuisine. You know, yes, there's formula, what is broiling and what is poaching, but then you have the individuality within that. That's what jazz was all about. Freedom within form, technical proficiency, but expressive individual thought. That's culture of New Orleans that we live it. And that's what I found in Fort Greene. So many artists who were saying, what is our journey? What is important to us? What's going to be our contribution to the human diaspora? And voice that. And it was so many young people doing it and beautiful women that I was happy I was living there.
When you walk around in those neighborhoods now, how does that feel? Has it changed a lot? Has it changed dramatically?
Yes.
Is it still the same petri dish and nurturing community for a young artist?
Yeah, I guess it is. Not so much. Maybe it's just me with age and travel and being living in different places. I'm tri-coastal. I'm in New York, Los Angeles, and New Orleans. And maybe it's just me getting older. I also meeting new and younger artists. I don't know who's in the loop right now. But I know that Fort Greene has changed. I can see the demographics have changed. I can see the monetary and economic demographics have changed. I talked to the old vendors there. My favorite restaurant is Wolof. This is not a paid endorsement or anything. Jollof and Pop I actually don't know his name. I call him Papa, right? I was like, Papa, you never delivered when I was in Fort Greene. Now all of a sudden you deliver, you know. I know the neighborhood is changing when you deliver. He said, but I have to deliver my food. I was like, yeah, I asked you to deliver in 1985. He was like, well, I cannot come all the way over there to Adelphi. So that's the thing that is, it's a give and take, and it's a frustrating. All of the services that are now available, that's the thing that it piques my attention. The people that lived there when I was living there in the 80s, we wanted all that same service. We wanted the resources of our city to come there and give us that same attention. We wanted the G train to actually run on time, you know? We wanted all of that. We wanted trash to be picked up. We wanted cab drivers to come to our neighborhood, pick us up, and not have to go through. Bruh, I know the rules. I will see you at TLC if you don't take me home. We wanted all of that. I actually think the green taxi service stuff is offensive to me. And so when you see the services come, that's when the hair on my neck and my ire gets stirred, because why does that demographic then all of a sudden get the attention and the services and everything that we have been asking for multitude of decades in this community?
That's the rub of gentrification.
Absolutely. And the other rub is the fact that don't think, as you are the new New Orleanian, as I like to call the folks in New Orleans, I tell them, don't think we didn't know how wonderful our neighborhood was before you got here. Okay? That's the most important thing. We knew how wonderful the culture was. We understood how wonderful the architecture was. We understand how wonderful it would be to have public transportation come on a regular basis, because actually we disproportionately use it a lot more than you. The streetcar for you is a tourist ride. Streetcar for me is how I'm going to get to work. So we understood how important that was, and to see the battle that the folks in those neighborhoods, whether it's because of race and class or whatever the variable is, that we had to go through with City Hall to get resources. I actually was told by a city council chief of staff for the president of city council in New Orleans, the Ninth Ward is just not viable. And I said, what do you mean the Ninth Ward isn't viable? It's not where most of the population came from the country, especially if you were black. You knew somebody in the Ninth Ward, the family owned the house, and maybe 10,000 people from your family living there. But it was, everybody came there at one point before they made it in the city on their own. It's viable, it's important. And she just said, no, it isn't. And I said, well, just name one place you've gone to the Ninth Ward that's important to you. And she's like, well, I've gone past there a lot. I said, no, just one place. And she said, oh, I go through there all the time. And I said, I'm not talking about when you go through the Ninth Ward, going to St. Bernard Parish. Where in the Ninth Ward? And this woman who controls the purse strings of New Orleans said, Wendell, I've never been to the Ninth Ward.
And that's not an unusual story. Whether you're talking about New Orleans, I think
Right.
in places in Brooklyn, if you're talking about the play that you're doing, right? And there's
Right.
lots of themes of gentrification, the upside and the downside, and kind of where they have that uncomfortable rub. Like, great
Yeah.
news, streetcar is going.
Yeah.
Bad news, it's really not your neighborhood anymore. So,
Economic development is something that was always desired in the neighborhoods, always wanted. It was the fact that, my parents always taught me there are those who do not have your best interests at heart. And that's something that is going to be a constant, and we have to realize that gentrification, those who benefit from gentrification always make the assumption that those before did not know what to do.
right.
Or did not know how to go about to get that power. And it was fighting and fighting. It was like, no, we knew exactly what to do. We didn't have that access. We've had those challenges placed in front of us constantly over and over and over again.
Our story that we did in Pontchartrain Park was really about sort of getting access to an ability to rebuild and bring a middle-class community back and not necessarily have it completely change the demographics in that community. So where does that stand now?
Pontchartrain Park, the neighborhood I grew up in New Orleans, would be what St. Albans is to New York, what Baldwin Hills is to L.A. In 1955, it was the one place in segregated New Orleans where my father, as a soldier coming back from World War II, is the only place that he could purchase a home as a black man. He wasn't allowed to purchase anywhere else because of segregation. It was the one place that they said, we have this movement led by the civil rights leader A.P. Turo at the time, saying we want access to green space, because in New Orleans, as ignorant as racism and segregation is, this is a real good display of it. You can only go to the parks on Wednesdays, Negro Day. You couldn't go to a green space, open air, except one day a week. And so fighting that advocacy to change that gave us Pontchartrain Park, a set-aside, separate but equal, next to a white neighborhood. The same developer did the same houses, and they put a trench between the two. It was kind of like a DMZ. This is the wall. Don't cross over here. 200 acres, 1,000 homes around a golf course designed by Joseph Bartholomew. He designed most of the courses in New Orleans City Park, golf course number 1 and 2, Metairie Country Club, but he couldn't play on any of them because he was a black man. Actually, I think the scene from the golf movie with Will Smith, he used to walk the course at night so white people wouldn't see him on his own course. So that was Pontchartrain Park, separate but equal. So we took something ugly and made it beautiful. It became an incubator for black talent. The first black mayor, Dutch Morial, came out of there. His son, Mark Morial, who is now president of National Urban League. Lisa Jackson, the former director of the EPA. I grew up with her. Musicians like Terrence Blanchard, the Grammy Award-winning trumpeter who lived in Brooklyn also. We grew up in this wonderful neighborhood, and it was an incubator for black talent. It was also the deepest flooding in Katrina. 20 feet of water over all the homes for a month. It was over. Our parents, in their 70s and 80s, we thought the neighborhood is gone now, it's going to be over. And I realized that if someone said they saw Trump driving around one time, that's the urban myth. Trump was driving around and said, man, a golf course, 1,000 homes, I could take it over. And someone called me and said, Wendell, if you don't get involved, we're going to lose the neighborhood. And I owed it to my parents' generation, this Moses generation. They gave it to us, this Joshua generation, and gave us this foundation to go off and be successful men and women to really put out a call to action. And I said, we don't need to do it asking anyone for any help. We have the talent within our own ranks. We're going to create our own resident-initiated community development corp, and we are rebuilding Pontchartrain Park brick by brick, block by block, house by house. Right now, we got 150 properties that were given back to government. We took over the properties so we could redevelop them with solar, geothermal. I asked if people were going to come back to a disaster zone. It had to be an upgrade, and we got the properties. But here's the rub. As much as we fought for those properties to get them back, we have been a stable neighborhood for 50 years. We've paid enough taxes that, we deserve the opportunity. The restriction and prohibition is we can't sell it to just anybody. I have no problem with that. Mixed income. We're happy with that. This working class, middle class neighborhood, we welcome, a less, affluent class. We are restricted to only sell it to 80% average median income and below, someone basically who makes about $25,000. No family that makes more than $30,000 can buy it. So you have people of my generation from Pontchartrain Park who says, I want to buy my house across the street from my grandmother. Yes, I want to be a popular. Here's cash. We've had to turn away cash buyers because they can't buy. Now, why would you want to restrict that sort of development? Well, here's the thing. Tear down all public housing. That could be market rate next to the French Quarter, St. Bernard, and they change the names and everything changes. It's like if the Marcy projects became, Gloriaville, something. Right? Hope 6. Now this is market rate, but you are forced to only be able to sell to low income, which I have no problem with selling to low income, but you restrict. I've had to turn away a generation of people who said, I want to participate. I've heard your call to action. I can buy a $150,000 house. You make too much money, you can't buy it. That, to me, is un-American, and that's a prohibition that's put on there because they're trying to restrict and suppress people who are trying to come back to New Orleans and redevelop. They got rid of the people, as Derek O'Dwyer said on the front page of the Wall Street Journal the week of Katrina, this is going to be our opportunity to get rid of all the people we don't want in New Orleans. His exact words. He doesn't regret it to this day, and those are the people that control city government, put policy in place to make sure that it facilitates their dream.
So tell me how that story connects to Brothers from the Bottom.
Brothers from the Bottom is a play written by Jackie Alexander, our wonderful artistic director, who taps into that very, yes. And while we're speaking about talent, I just saw the cast. The cast, if you would stand up, we have Thaddeus Daniels, we have Wendell Franklin, who plays my brother, we have Takara Cash, who plays my wife, we have Megan Robinson, who plays my sister-in-law, and we have Kevin Mambo, who plays Lou, my good friend. The cast of Brothers from the Bottom, opening on March 6th at the Billie Holiday Theatre. We
Tell us the story.
are in this neighborhood where there is gentrification happening. We actually have people who are from the neighborhood who have differing points of view. Someone who's developing the neighborhood that we feel as though is going to move people out who've been there 60 years or so, who we think are facilitating a dream for someone else. And it's a prodigal son story, really. One brother who is coming back from New York, who is seldom coming home, and he comes home, and we're happy that he's home, and we think he's going to do something good, and I realize, and I am the brother who has been there, like our father, who's the community activist protecting the neighborhood, and I'm suspicious of the plans that he's involved with. And then there's a secret, and once that secret is revealed, I realize it may not be as good a project as we think it is. And you get the differing points of view that's happening in the story of gentrification, of how economic development in every neighborhood is a wonderful thing. I love all the restaurants in Fort Greene now. I love all of the business in Fort Greene now. I love the fact that property values are up. At what cost? I personally believe that the two can coexist. My character is saying that there is a value in the fact that we had a neighborhood of substance, value that was important to the people, and the people are not expendable. So we have to find a way, as I said to you in the documentary, to bring solutions to the table. The two can coexist. We can actually bring economic development to our communities, but not at the expense of the men and women who have been there for decades and generations, who have done their part. They did exactly what was asked of them: pay their taxes, pay their mortgage on time, and they cannot just be priced out of their own communities. The actual renters there were the economic engine of that community all along, and the two can coexist, and it doesn't have to be at the expense of each other.
Whether you're talking about New Orleans or you're talking about parts of Brooklyn, and Spike Lee has spoken about this a fair amount, I think people would say people are expendable at times.
Well, listen. There's an ugly side to human nature, right? We always assume and attack racism and sexism and homophobia as if we just do the right things and we wake people's consciousness, it'll go away forever and we'll all hold hands and run under the rainbow, you know? And the fact is, the barbarians are at the gates at all times. That veil is lifted every once in a while and we see that ugly side of human nature, and then it's put down, and then we get relaxed and assume that it goes away. 50 years ago, in 2 weeks, the character I portrayed in Selma, Reverend Hosea Williams stood next to John Lewis and was beaten as they were marching for voting rights. The thing that most people forget is that it was a police murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson, that they wanted. Some of the people said, let's take the body all the way to Montgomery and put the body on the steps of the Capitol and challenge George Wallace. That's where the idea of going from Selma to Montgomery came from a police brutality murder. And here we are 50 years later, almost to the day. People would think that we actually shot the film before Ferguson and before Eric Garner. After Eric Garner and Ferguson, when we did it before. And you see that 50 years later, those very rights that people fought and died for. That's the one thing about the portrayal of the civil rights movement I want to make sure that's clear. It is not some quaint, romanticized story that, we got to sleep in that hotel and sit at that counter and some white kid threw a little flower on my head and, it's an inconvenience. There's blood on that ballot box. There's people died. And if we're going to honor those who died on foreign shores and in foreign wars, for what they did to secure our American rights, we're going to honor those that died on country roads in the Alabama River, that gave their lives to make sure that we secured their rights. We should honor them the same way. What is so insidious and ugly is the fact that they died alone, looking into the eyes and face of their murderer, who was another American, who claimed that you will not have these same rights. And as I stood on that Edmund Pettus Bridge, the most profound moment for me was after we had filmed. And I stood there on the bridge, and I so distinctly could hear, I had a very spiritual moment, all of those people saying, the souls at the bottom of that Alabama River saying, Wendell, don't forget us. Tell our story. Tell our story. The funeral is a privilege. We get to honor those who have gone away. We know their story. We get to grieve and say it. So many people died that we don't know anything about. Their stories, their names, their families missing, gone. And we're reaping the benefit of what they gave, the ultimate sacrifice, so that we can, and for us to ever let down our guard and think that the fight is over as they take away the voting rights bill just last year, as we have men and women getting killed unjustly on the streets, that our rights and privileges are being challenged at all time, it would be a dishonor to them that gave the ultimate sacrifice. So for them, you have to continually fight and understand that it's an ongoing challenge. It is a continuum. It should become a part of your pocket, just like change for the bus, or the dollar for the bus, or your Metro card.
And yet, I think a lot of these conversations, people have described it to me as race fatigue. They're tired of having this conversation.
Right.
Even if you look at the Martin Luther King Day holiday,
Right.
you, first of all, would not realize that half the people tweeting about it voted against it, right?
Yeah,
Number
right.
one. And I think also it's a very much a very comfortable version of Dr. King.
The movie?
No,
Or,
I think that just
people-
the how most people think about Dr. King, you lose a lot of the context.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and I'm curious if being an activist and being socially really pushing for change, if that's had a cost to you, do you think in any way in your career?
Well, wow, yeah, that's interesting. A lot of people ask me that. You know, a lot of people do. I never thought about it until recently. First of all, you know, people try to make the term activist, a dirty word.
Yeah, to me it has there's no...
Right? You're an activist. They go, oh man, you're an activist. I'm like, man, I'm an American. I am embracing the American aesthetic like those wonderful slave-owning founding fathers of ours, right? That's what everybody says I'm an activist. I said, actually, I'm just an American. You know, I know that I have these rights. I know people in my family personally, died to make sure that I secured these rights. I had an uncle who died in World War I. He couldn't even go to school past the 6th grade in Louisiana. It's against the law for his black ass to go to school past the 6th grade. And yet he went to fight for this country and died, So I don't see myself as an activist. I see myself as an extension of that generation that passed on to me, understanding that there are those who don't have my best interests at heart, and that to be a self-fulfilled human being, you should never lose the right to be offended. You should never lose the right to be offended. And people will always try to challenge you and say, well, man, why are you causing trouble? They had just yesterday in the Hollywood Reporter, the anonymous Academy member who said, the problem with Selma is the fact that they went to their New York premiere with I Can't Breathe shirts. And by the way, I was the one who did that. And I'm not going to vote for that movie, right? I'm not voting for that movie because they did that, and that was offensive to me. And her exact words were, either you want to be a Best Picture Oscar nominee and winner, or you want to start shit. That's what she saw that it was. She completely missed the point that, one, we are supposed to be judged on the merit of the quality of our filmmaking and as artists, right? I thought that was the barometer by which you should judge me. And secondly, if there's any cast that should have been wearing the I Can't Breathe shirts, it should have been Selma.
So the political kind of finds its way into your work.
So it finds my way into the work. I feel as though as an actor, you are an activist. As an actor, you are challenging the human experience. You are a student of human behavior. You want to explore the ugly and the beautiful, and hopefully, in your journey, bring some enlightenment to what we're going through the human experience, to put on the table of discussion so that we can evolve and become better. We want to understand the ugliness of people. The villainous characters that you portray is because we just don't want to see the villainy. We want to understand what is it in the human nature that would make someone that villainous and that evil and that awful. Let's try to check that before it becomes that awful. We want to celebrate what that love is, that when we see the beauty of how two people come together and fall in love. The study of human behavior, the study of the human existence, that's why we turn the lights off and look at a play and sit in and we say, I recognize myself in that. Let me go home and see what I've learned from it. Oh, she reminds me of my aunt. That reminds me of my dad. Let me remember what they said to me. That's the legacy. That's the role of art. That's the role of art in society as a whole, and people forget that.
Why did you want to do this play? What appealed to you about it?
First of all, I lived around the corner from the Billie Holiday Theatre when I first moved to Brooklyn, and I remember going to Restoration. I remember the ice skating there. This kid, the 17-year-old kid from New Orleans in Crown Heights and in Bed-Stuy, it's a fond memory. I also believe that as an actor gets a little recognition, we have to remember to be supportive of theaters that gave us the platform to get there. And Billie Holiday Theatre, while this is my debut there, has done that for 40 plus years, for so many actors, to give them a platform and give the community access to art that, they don't have to go to Manhattan or pay $200 to go see a Broadway play. They can actually see a play in their community and have some impact. I think it's a responsibility. I think it's sad that we have a generation of actors that came out of Yale and Juilliard and NYU and San Diego and all of these great schools, USC, I think see Kevin looking at me, don't forget my school, Negro Ensemble Company should be alive and well and thriving today. But a whole generation of actors just had film careers and went on, and they didn't do that play. I try to do a play a year. And so this has been a part of my mantra of we have to go to the Billie Holiday Theatre and the Lorraine Hansberry Theatre in San Francisco and the Black Repertory Theatre in St. Louis and all of these in Jubilee in Houston and support all of those small theaters and bring whatever sort of notoriety maybe to fill the seats and bring a play there and where it's mutually beneficial. I am, and Jackie can tell you, I'm learning a lot from my colleagues. Say, man, you better step your game up, and from the challenge of doing this play, so it's a give and take. So whatever I may bring to the theater is giving so much more back to me, and then we can collectively give to the community as a whole. And the Billie Holiday Theatre is now, for the next 2 years, going to make its mark in the new Arts District of Brooklyn with BAM and Theatre for New Audience and the Mark Morris and all of that, which is very important. And it's very important because while I support all those theaters, I lived in that neighborhood. There's not one time BAM did anything that utilized the talent, the pool of talent that was around the corner from them ever. Everything that was done there was from across the pond. I don't know if it's still like that. It's just like, hey, man, I saw that play in London. Why is it, around here, in the corner from Brooklyn? And I know all of these artists right around the corner that you are not even tapping into the pool of talent there. And so Billie Holiday is a necessity for that new Brooklyn theater district because diversity is an issue there also.
What do you like doing more? Plays, movies, TV?
Good material.
Really? Doesn't
I used
matter?
I used to be a theater snob.
Uh-huh.
I only do the theater. Yeah. Oh, for the muse of fire that we descend. And I realized I wanted to do good material. I realized good material can exist in all mediums, and that was important to me. But also, as an actor who studied at Juilliard for all those long hours and days, I said I want to utilize it in all the forms. So I try to do the trifecta a year, which is I try to do television, film, and a play every year.
What's been your favorite project? Can you say? I know it's sort of like asking.
The Brothers from the Bottom, of course.
Hasn't opened yet, so let's talk from say.
But now
after
that, I always knew for me I was going to be a journeyman actor.
What's that mean exactly?
A journeyman actor is, a lot of actors will train and then they go, listen, I just want to do film. I want to be a movie star. I have no problem with that. I just want to do film. I don't want to do plays. Then you have all the people like, I just want to be, those film actors, they don't know what they're doing. 3 minutes and it's over. I want to do Shakespeare. I want to be in the regional theater. And I just said, with all of that money and all that training and all those years, I want to do all of it. And so I try to have that I look at my resume and go, what haven't I done? What do I need to do? So I love the fact that I've worked internationally. I've done a radio show and the BBC called Tradition. I've actually produced a play at the National Theatre of Uganda called Biro with Ntade Mwine, who lived around the corner from me on Adelphi Street in Brooklyn. And we couldn't get into BAM, but we got into the National Theatre of Uganda. I keep realizing people from BAM may be here. I have a friend who works at 651, so she's heard this argument from me all the time. So that I've worked, I did the Oedipus cycle at the Parthenon, at the foot of the Acropolis, at the Theater Herod Atticus, at Creon. That was a highlight of my career, but one that was especially close to me was when I did Waiting for Godot in the Lower Ninth Ward. In the void of what was there soon after Katrina. And I played Vladimir. And to stand there with my fellow New Orleanians in that void and say, will it ever come back? Will we ever have anything? The existential nature of what Waiting for Godot was. It's one thing to lose your house in a fire or whatever, your community comes, family, friend. When you lose every reference point of life in one day, it is the scariest. I would not wish it on my worst enemy. And to stand there collectively with New Orleanians and saying those lines, at this place, at this moment of time, all mankind is us. Let us do something, was the most cathartic moment of my life. Because we collectively were saying, while in pain, we can come back.
Why does that make you cry now?
It was so many people who didn't need to die. I was there, and you can only get cell reception at night, and I kept calling. And I said, hey, man, listen, the city has flooded. We are in the hinterlands. We're all over. You got to get the word out to people come down. And I would get friends for brief moments on the phone, and like, Wendell, no, we know. I was like, no, actually, people can't know because no one's coming. You can't know. And I had a friend that said, no, we're watching it on TV. And I said, you can't be watching this on TV. The president's not watching this on TV. The president of the United States wouldn't. And when I got out, I found out that people were watching it on TV. And that forget if you're the president or whatever, forget President George Bush, the fact that George Bush, any man in his position, chose to fly over New Orleans to see, when he had the power to call on the 82nd Airborne, whose motto is, we can be anywhere on earth in 48 hours. And the 82nd Airborne is in Georgia. And I'm in New Orleans. To this day. And then the greatest crime in history, which is, people always say, well, why didn't you come back? What's so difficult? Why is it? None of our insurance policies were honored. My parents paid Allstate for 50 years, and they got $400. We recognized Katrina as 10 days. You get $40 a day. And not just for one person. $20 for your mother, $20 for your father. And that was it. I said, oh yeah, you the good hands people. I see them hands like that, and you're squeezing mine, needless to say. And that is why I cry, because it was the greatest crime in history.
So when you look back now, coming up on the 10th anniversary, you're optimistic. You're there. It's your third coast.
Yeah, it's my third coast. I think it's miraculous that we've come back. The battles of gentrification, the battles of politics, I'm gonna put Mitch Landrieu out there, who's being celebrated as the great mayor who brought it back. That's great. He has, for some. If I lived uptown of Canal Street, this has been the most miraculous economic development and restoration of New Orleans and of a major city in the history of the world. If I lived downtown of Canal Street, it has been nothing but a political system that has done everything possible to try to strangle and kill neighborhoods economically, spiritually, and physically. I actually opened Sterling Farms to go into destitute
That's a grocery store.
grocery stores,
Fresh fruit.
to go into food deserts. I was developing, my grocery store didn't open in the Ninth Ward. I had it in the introduction. I was planned to open it in the Ninth Ward. I was being celebrated by Senator Landrieu as an example of a businessman who's coming back to the community in need. A grocery store was needed in the lower Ninth Ward prior to the storm. It hadn't had a decent grocery store in 20 years, and something as simple as access to fresh food would be a miraculous, wonderful thing to bring to the lower Ninth Ward, and I am honored and happy to have Wendell here. As Senator Landrieu said, this is the economic development that I want to bring here, and while she was giving me accolades in the meetings in the lower Ninth Ward, her brother, Mitch Landrieu, mayor of New Orleans, was killing the deal with Goldman Sachs because my business partner had run for mayor against him. I have a letter of intent to open on Broad in Bienville right now, where the developers never returned my calls after a while, asked me to personally guarantee their mortgage, and I said, well, we weren't going to go into real estate, but how much of the complex am I going to own? They said, none of it. We just want you to back our mortgage. I said, I was born that night, but not last night, right? I'm not going to do that. They said, well, we want a year rent in advance. I said, well, the day I move in, I got to give you a year's rent in advance for my grocery store? They said, no, not when you move in. We want it now. I said, the building isn't going to be built for a year. They said, still, we want it now. They stopped returning our calls. I opened the paper, just like you did, Soledad, and saw that Mitch Landrieu gave Whole Foods, one of the most rich companies. I love Whole Foods. You know, I spend my $20 for macadamia nuts like everybody else. Right? And he gave them a grant for $2 million. A grant. You don't have to spend it back. And everybody said, and I know you hear this as you travel to New Orleans, that Whole Foods is in Treme. Those people can't afford that. I said, well, Whole Foods is going to be there as long as that $2 million subsidy cushions the losses they have. Now, as soon as they start losing and they realize that that community is out of their price range, below their margin, they're going to go.
Or the community will change.
The community will change. And that's where gentrification is.
We're back to where we began. So how does it end? I mean, this cycle of gentrification and
the way it ends is the social justice movement of the 21st century is economic development. The social justice movement of the 21st century is economic development. Every community we're going into with Sterling Farms, and they always hate this, and the councilman could tell you, I said, you have an Office of Economic Development. You have staff. You have all of these people on the payroll, and a lot of that money could go into development, right, and pre-development, but that's what their role is, to bring development into those communities, no matter where the stratus is on the economic scale. And so therefore, whether it's the Upper West Side or Red Hook or anywhere, no matter where people are, you want to bring business in there and make sure, listen, and it's all interconnected. You look at violence as a student of human behavior. You want to stop a bullet? Jobs stop bullets. Jobs stop bullets. It's an underground economy. Kids don't grow up and go, one day I want to be a drug dealer. Guess what? Even poor kids, there's not a car, there's not a chain that they're so enamored with that they go, I want to risk my life to have that car. They just want to be in the economic game. The same thing, people act as if the same human impulses that they have in their comfortable middle-class life is not the same impulses that some low-income kid has. It's the same impulses. I want to develop myself as a human being. I would love to have wonderful experiences in life of love and success, and I want to have some sort of economic cushion. I would like to build some sort of wealth. It's the same thing, and protect my future, and we have the same impulses. And it's those, I'm a capitalist. I am a true capitalist. And I say a true capitalist because most capitalists believe everyone should have access to opportunity. Everyone should have access to education. Everyone should have access to opportunity, because the more access, the more ideas, the more growth, the more wealth. This new idea of what I call the fake capitalists are people who feel as though wealth is a finite thing. Finite. Ain't no more being made. There's only a certain amount of wealth, and we got to do everything possible to hoard it. Opportunity. Only my kid's going to go to that school. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go so far as to redirect all of the public treasury for our education just for my business, first of all, so I'm going to get into charter school business, and then only for my kids. And now, here, I'm going to control the charter school board, so I don't even have to teach those special education kids. There's no requirement. We can just let them go to the wayside, and I got a building down in Dumbo that we can just warehouse them or something one time. Or we let them live on the street down in the Bowery like in the old days or whatever, or under the bridge in New Orleans or in Los Angeles, where all of downtown is homeless, mentally challenged, schizophrenic, people who did not have any of that safety net there because it has been carved all away from our resources. Away from our resources. And so we say, we're just going to push them to the side, and I'm going to hoard opportunity for my kids, my wealth. 13,000 families in this country make more than the rest of the country combined. Combined. And I think I don't make enough, but I know I'm a part of that 1%. But, people remind me, man, you're a part of that 1%. I'm like, man, I'm a part of the 1%. So if I'm a part of the 1%, man, you guys are really hurting. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm comfortable. I'm very comfortable, but I gotta watch it. I better be working next month, But it's that sort of mentality of the so-called capitalists that hoard, that say, I want to cut off opportunity. Only there's a finite amount of wealth in this pie, and I want the pie. Where true capitalism was everyone, give everyone access. And I like to remind people, if we look at human nature and the violence in our communities, that's what the Wild West did. You look at the movies, what do? The cowboys at it again. They shooting and killing, gunfighting in the street. Go east and get a school marm and open a school so we can educate some of these ignorant suckers, right? And so they can be elevated. That's how the West was won. By, kind of civilizing it, putting it in check, putting some of the violence in check. I guess after they killed all the Indians, they didn't have anything else to do, So, I know I sound to open it up. I'm sorry, I'm going to shut up.
Who's got a question? Raise your hand. We'll bring a mic to you. Raise your hand if you have a question. We're going to bring the mic to you. Oh, way over here. I'm sorry. Thank you, sir.
And I will remember the 3 B's. Be brief, brother.
Good evening. Quick question. Where are you performing?
We are performing at the Brooklyn Music
School.
School. Right. Yes.
founded in 1909 and part of the settlement movement. The Brooklyn
Yes.
Music School is a non-for-profit. This is a fantastic story because the partnership with...
That was very smooth, by the
Thank
way.
you.
That was-
Thank you.
I'm impressed. I'm impressed.
The partnership with Billie Holiday Theatre is a great story for the Brooklyn Music School. We're very honored and delighted to have you guys. So keep Wendell comfortable and come to the play. We'll see you at the state. See you at the theater.
The Brooklyn Music School.
Next question. Raise your hand, and we'll bring the mic to you.
I did a movie with Beyonce. Oh, now we got a question. Okay.
Always works.
I know.
Hi. Am I on? Oh, hi. In your very rich and complete resume, and that you're still searching for things to do, have you ever considered doing a Clint Eastwood and doing a term in politics?
Over the course of the last 10 years, as I've gotten involved in New Orleans and trying to bring it back, I got involved in politics as a supporter, and I realized that I would much rather be a kingmaker than the king.
Why?
That. Listen, I don't think I have the facility to really be. There are people who are a lot more competent, a lot more intelligent. I want to put issues onto the ballot, so that's why I try to stay as vocal as possible. One of the issues I have with the mayor of New Orleans is the fact that we have all of these blighted properties, and I say we have CDBG money. Why don't you take 2% mortgages and offer that for police, firemen, and EMT, and let that be a recruitment incentive. Since there's such a problem recruiting policemen in New Orleans, I know of a whole bunch of people who'll be like, I'll be a cop if I get a 2% mortgage guaranteed. Oh, yeah. And then it actually solves the blighted property, too, because you say you can only get it if you redevelop this property. And the mayor said, hey, do you want me to fix the streets and the lights or play banker? Wendell wants me to play banker. So I'd rather put issues like that on the table. I actually was challenged by the mayor saying that I wasn't compliant with HUD on the front page of the Times-Picayune with my development in Pontchartrain Park, and it was because I raised $1.5 million. I hate to say this. I raised $1.5 million, so I was able to get in touch with people in HUD and say, hey, I'm being challenged. Maybe you can see if you can come down here and we can have a come to Jesus meeting. I know that I would not have had that access had I not been a bundler, Granted, it was on the Democratic side, so I was happy with what I was bundling for. But you see that money in politics gives you access, and that's, I would rather not have the access and take that money out of politics. But the classic left liberal answer, until that day happens, I'm going to be bundling.
Right over here.
Can you talk a little bit about the Treme project and the film, that is, or I don't know what the television series,
Yes.
and where that is now and what that experience was like?
Well, Treme was a series for 4 years on HBO, created by David Simon, who did The Wire. And it was the first time anyone on commercial television was actually trying to do a play or do a piece about culture and the role of culture in community. And what a better place, there's no better place to do it than New Orleans and the role of culture, the northernmost Caribbean city, the last Bohemia. We live our culture. And also, David can't do anything without being that eye of seeing the dysfunction and that was also going hand in hand in New Orleans at the time. Treme, I played a musician on it. There was a Mardi Gras Indian chief who's on it. There was a chef. You saw the issues of gentrification that we're a part of, the real estate, the land grab, how they were tricking people out of their properties. You saw all of the things. Let New Orleans be the canary in the mine for all of the tricks of the trade to try to get you out of your property. It was on display in full tilt in New Orleans. But one of the best things about Treme was the fact that David tried to show something that was poetic. It was amorphic, ever-changing. It was different. It was never something that was strange on television, but people didn't understand it, but they were attracted to it. They understood. And the one thing he demonstrated was, if you speak to the authenticity of who we are as human beings, to our humanness, to our humanity, the more specific you are, the more universal you become. So I was constantly asked this in New Orleans: do people outside of New Orleans get it? Yes. Right? And then outside of New Orleans, people were saying, do people in New Orleans know we get it? You know? They felt, and everyone realized that when you're authentic and real and true, and that's what art, the forum of art is always searching for, authenticity. I was talking to my colleague, Megan Robinson is a physicist by education. And I told her that I learned to act in trigonometry class because you had all of these different people coming up with different tools and variables and theories to come to that one true and authentic answer of the proof. You can come from a multitude of different ways, but what that answer is in a proof is, unshakable. And it's authentic and true. And that is what art is. You can come from all sorts of perspectives, and that truth is unshakable. That human truth is unshakable. That is what poetry and art and music and cuisine and the culture is, that connection, that human connection and that authenticity. And that was on display in Treme. A lot more than what The Wire was about, which really was about moral ambiguity and the dysfunction of our institutions, whether it's a drug gang or a city hall or the police department. Treme was about the poetry of life and how from the disparate fields of existence, there's something exact and true and authentic and human that connects us all. And that's what Treme was about for me. And that was the thing that salvaged us, because it was therapeutic for all the people who had gone through the flood to look at Treme and say, this is why I came back. This is what I'm fighting to regain. This gives me strength and fortitude to hang in there as I go through all these trials and tribulations. The other thing was, it was the last 4 years I got to spend with my mother. So it will be forever a wonderful, time of sharing the end of my mother's life, because I happened to be cast in a TV show at home. So that was a blessing.
Go ahead, sir.
You and David Simon have obviously been very good for one another. Neither of those series would have been remotely as good as they were without you.
No, thank you.
And so, does he have something that he's working on that he has a place for you in right now?
Well, we all, every actor who's worked with David appreciates the fact that he kind of approaches his work with a sort of Orson Welles Mercury Theater approach of having a repertory group of actors that they've worked with. I happen not to be in his Yonkers projects, but that's okay. So I look forward to an opportunity of working with him again. David was first my boss, then a true colleague, then someone I admired, then he just really became a friend. And David reminds me that it's possible to be in a commercial setting and do the work that you want to do. This one actor told me, The Wire for you was like your godfather. You can do whatever you want now. You can sell out, you can be in a chicken suit, hawking El Pollo Loco, around the corner. because you will always be able to take that chicken head off and say, listen, kid, I was bunk on the wire, you know? And David has given me that gift, is freedom, yes. He's a very special man and has a very special voice, you know, and I think David has really carved out something that allows Breaking Bads to happen and other shows that challenge commercial television and the milieu, House of Cards and all of those, House of Lies, all of those. He's not. He's doing the Yonkers project right now. We're not doing anything together. He's doing a project called A Hero's Made Every Day, I think. It was about the housing issue of Yonkers in the 1970s and 80s. It's going to be hot. Yeah, it's perfect for David. And then he is also about to do a project that I'm going to be talking to him about, which is the change of Times Square right at the end of the sex industry and as it turned into the new Times Square. And he's developing that now. And I think, you know, I would be, oh, that's my phone, I know it. I'm sorry, somebody. Thank you, Wayne.
That's a loud ring. That's in a whole other room.
That's where I get these. I'm old, so I can't hear. So I got that old school loud ass ring. You know, the only thing missing is, hey, Wendell, your telephone. So he's doing the transition of Times Square. He wants to do a series about the transition of Times Square from where it was in the 70s going into, as the sex industry goes away and the new Times Square came to, the Disneyfication of Times Square. And I think I could be a Disney exec or a pimp, you know. So hopefully I will be in that series. Or that's the same thing, yes.
We had a question right over here.
Yes. What drives you? And
My mortgage.
well.
Besides that, no.
Yes. What drives you, and has it changed?
Yes, it has changed. What drove me before was just a young actor coming from New Orleans. I just wanted the opportunity to be a working actor. That's all I wanted. I didn't want to be famous, had no dreams of becoming rich. I just wanted to be a working actor. I just wanted to be able to earn my living as an actor. And that was it. That was it. Then what happens as you get older, especially, and the opportunity that I've been afforded, and you realize when you see injustices, you say, you just can't stand on the sidelines sometimes. And that, for me, it was Katrina by necessity. You know, I had to get my parents back in. I got my parents back into the home so fast, then people in the community say, Wendell, man, you got to help us all. You can bring attention to this. And then you go, yeah, this is cool. This is easy. I'm going to bring solutions to the table. To me, it was real easy. It's like, of course, you want to bring everyone back. You want to make it easy for everyone to come back. People want, the fact that anyone wants to come back to a disaster zone, it's easy. Easy peasy. Then you started hearing the stories of my church members who weren't let off the buses right outside of New Orleans. People shooting at people on the bridge as they're coming across, saying, you can't come back. Then realizing the only reason the story got out is because there was a white couple from Boston walking across that bridge with these thousands of black folks who said, no, there were some redneck sheriffs in Gretna who shot saying, you cannot leave New Orleans. We don't want you niggas coming over here. And the only reason the story got out is because there was this white couple that was a part of it, that was just horrified. That, you know, because they were there, you know, the media got to hear it. And you start to see and hear these injustices, and then it's really personal because New Orleans is so small. You're like, man, I know you. You know? I went to school with you. You know? You were an ass in school, and now you're an ass now. You know? But you're in a position of power. No, it's not going to go down like that. And you realize that it doesn't have to be that way. And it's this mentality that you feel as though if you give access to everyone, then you're going to be denied something. And so that's the thing that made me change. I've never even considered that anyone wouldn't hire me because of what I say. And if you don't want to hire me because of what I say, I don't want to work with you anyway, you know? I'm going to get mine. And then if I ever get afraid of that, I think of Ozzie Davis. I think of Harry Belafonte. I actually think of Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston was very much a part of the civil rights movement, who got lost in his later days, you know? And I felt, you know, I mean, really. I can appreciate, we don't have the same point of view at all, but one of my best experiences, I mean, we really don't have the same point of view, who became a dear friend this year and mentor, he's one of the best actors I've ever worked with, taught me so much, Jon Voight. Now, Jon Voight, I mean, I didn't know Jon had gone so right-wing and crazy, you know. Well, I shouldn't say they're crazy. He has a point of view, but he's crazy. And I said, but we would, you know, because we were sharing stuff on the set of Ray Donovan, you know, he's just schooling me. I mean, and Jon Voight is 75 years old, and you would think, man, you would know it. He's virile and constantly no matter how famous he is and how great his celebrity is, he was always talking about acting with me. Wendell, what do you think about that? I don't think so. That's enough fuel to the fire. Do you think we would have more of a competitive conflict? Do you think that's what he wants? What do you want in the scene? And I was just like, man, you still talk about the work. It was great. And then I turned on Fox News and he was like, and Obama needs to die. You know, I was like, oh my God. But you know the best thing that happened? I saw him on Fox News, and the next day, I saw him at work. I guess he knew my politics. We really hadn't talked politics. And he was real sheepish. You know what I'm saying? And he's like looking at me. And I never forget, I said, John, we boys, I like you. You know, we get along. He goes, yeah. I said, I saw that shit on Fox News. We cool. I don't agree with anything you said, but we're cool, you know? Oh, no, I wasn't thinking about that, but you could tell he was like, I wonder if he saw me. We may not be friends. I called him on his birthday. And he said, oh, Wendell, I can't believe you called me. This is really nice. I said, yeah, Mr. Voight. Man, don't call me Mr. Voight. John, yeah. I said, happy birthday, man. You were really the highlight of my year, you know, and becoming friends, that's great. He said, yeah. He says, Wendell, thank you. That means a lot. I saw you on Bill Maher. I said, you're damn right. He said, I'm going to see you at the party tonight. We got to talk. I said, yes, we do, John. Happy birthday. So, I mean, I don't know why I told that story.
It's a good story.
I forgot what the question was. But yes, so I've changed. And I've changed because we should never lose the right. We should never lose the ability to be offended. And if you see something that offends you, speak out against it. Do something about it. Put solutions on the table.
First of all, thank you so much for speaking here. It's been a pleasure and an honor just to listen to you speak. And there's this ancient Greek concept, parrhesia, the act of speaking truth to power at great risk to yourself. And I think that both in your career and in your activism outside of your career, I think you've been a really great example of that. My question is, if you had the opportunity to either embody a New Orleans historical figure who hasn't received a treatment in film or in theater, who you are really moved by, like who would you choose?
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good question. Hopefully told by a screenwriter. Asked by a screenwriter. That's really good. There's a couple of people. There's two people. No, that's one person. Paul Levine. Paul Levine was Haitian. Hades, yes. Viva Haiti. Haitian liberation happened 20 years before the American Civil War. Haitians came to New Orleans as a part of it being a French colony connection. They inhabited Treme. On Sundays in Congo Square, where jazz was born, the practice of allowing enslaved Africans to be released from their chains, play their drums, that African six, and then saying something about their captors with their European brass music, and it melding together with jazz. I literally can take you to the spot where jazz was born. That give and take, that cultural exchange was not only happening in music, it was there that Paul Levine, who printed L'Opinion, well, my French is bad, he printed this newspaper. They had the first boycott of streetcars in 1848 there. It is where David Plessy was a part of this advocacy group who challenged Jim Crow, Plessy versus Ferguson. I could take you to the corner right outside of Treme at Franklin and in the Bywater on Franklin Avenue, where he got on the train and was arrested. I thought he made it a little further. He really didn't make it out of New Orleans. They were like, "Oh no, Negro, we got you." He was the father of the modern day civil rights movement. He was the father, and he believed in liberté. He believed in the French idea of liberty and freedom, and was very much a part of the Haitian Revolution. Came to New Orleans, and there was that connection. Paul Levine there. Also, around the same time, Day was writing, African who was writing classical music with Gottschalk also, both Creole writing classical music, and it was the center of the world for European classical music. New Orleans opera was the center of the world, was in New Orleans. The New Orleans Opera House was the main place in these colonies before New York and the Met. This was the place, and they actually had these men of color who were writing. They were all contemporaries of Paul Levine. There was the Battle of the Pews at that time at St. Augustine Church in Treme, where being taught this religion that they would disgrace. Slaves were going to this Catholic church, and as they had the Battle of the Pews, where they bought pews so they wouldn't have to sit in the back. So they bought more pews than the white folks so they wouldn't have to be in the back of the church. That was all happening around Paul Levine, who was this leader of this advocacy and started it all. I imagine, since it was around the same time, that he would know this other historical figure who is an American, the European-American Caucasian man, Paul Morphy, who was a chess player, one of the grand masters. And I envision that maybe they played chess together because it was around the same time. So he was at a time in New Orleans that was just very, very vibrant. Paul Levine.
We have time for one final question. Who'd like to? Let's give it right over here.
I talk too much, I'm sorry.
No, it's fantastic.
I just wanted to know, did you actually play those instruments in Treme?
Thank you.
The best for last.
Thank you. I learned every song, learned every solo, but they recorded Stafford Agee because Antoine had to have a lot more, chops than I had, I sounded like a fifth grader. So we would actually play in unison. He would be just off camera, and we would play in unison, and he would be mic'd, and they would record him. We recorded everything live. We did it before Les Miserables. We recorded everything live within the scene, and then they would do a track. They would play the tune one time through just musically. And when they did that, I would always go in a far distant corner and play very quietly, so it wouldn't be recorded really, but so spiritually I'm on every track, right? Because I'm playing.
Spiritually, love that. Wendell Pierce, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Fantastic.